Welcome back to another deep dive. Today, we're really plunging into a monumental period of history. It's a story about an individual who, well, redefined a subcontinent and played a fundamental role in the birth of not just one, but two nations. We're talking about Muhammad Ali Jinnah and the really complex, often contradictory journey that led to the creation of Pakistan. Get ready for some surprising facts, maybe a few aha moments, because as our sources show, this story is way richer and far more nuanced than the simple version you might have heard.
It really is a fascinating period and one that still echoes so strongly in the region today. The articles and research we're looking at give a remarkably detailed picture of Jinnah's political evolution, the deep motivations behind that demand for a separate Muslim state, and also the enduring ideological debates that continue to shape both India and Pakistan. So our mission today is really help you understand those pivotal moments, the strategic shifts, and the kind of competing visions that came together to create one of the 20th century's biggest and frankly most tragic partitions.
Okay, let's try and unpack that, because many people, when they hear the name Jinnah, they immediately think Pakistan, creator of Pakistan, full stop. But his early political life, well, it paints a very different picture, doesn't it? He started out as a pretty staunch Indian nationalist. What did that look like?
Yeah, that's absolutely the crucial starting point. You really need to grasp that to understand the later shift. Looking at the sources, Jinnah joined the Indian National Congress, the main nationalist party, way back in 1906. He was actually a protege, even honorary private secretary to Dadabhai Naoroji, who was this huge figure, the grand old man of India. And Jinnah was really influenced by moderates like Gopal Krishna Gokhale. Their vision was all about achieving self-rule through, constitutional legal methods, emphasis on secular inclusive progress. He really saw himself as a bridge builder then.
Right, so not just in the nationalist movement, but actively trying to bridge those internal divides, especially between Hindus and Muslims. Which brings us to the Lucknow Pact of 1916. That seems like a really key moment. What exactly was it, and what does it tell us about his views back then?
The Lucknow Pact was, well, it was exactly that, a landmark agreement, a really bold political move for its time. It actually brought the Congress and the All India Muslim League, which Jinnah had also joined, onto a common platform for demanding constitutional reforms from the British. And crucially, in this pact, Congress agreed to the Muslim League's demand for separate electorates for Muslims. Now, just for listeners, separate electorates meant that in certain areas, only Muslim voters could vote for Muslim candidates. It was a way to guarantee Muslim representation. But, looking back, it also kind of solidified a separate political identity.
And Jinnah was key in making that happen, wasn't he? He was the broker.
Absolutely. He was central to it, and his language at the time was all about unity. He famously said India was not to be governed by the Hindus, not by the Muslimans either. It is to be governed by the people and the sons of this country. He was explicitly pushing back against fears of Hindu domination, urging everyone to join hands. He even argued, look, you can't ignore 70 million Muslims in united India, but his goal was definitely integration then, not separation. But the interesting thing, the real insight here, is that even while he's pushing for unity, these mechanisms for separate political representation, like those electorates, they're already being put in place. It shows how the groundwork for partition was sort of laid bit by bit, years before Pakistan was even really conceived as a goal.
Okay, so given this really strong nationalist start, this commitment to unity, the big question is obvious. What happened? What forces, what turning points changed his path so dramatically? How did he go from being the ambassador of Hindu-Muslim unity, as he was sometimes called, to leading a movement for a separate state?
It's definitely a complex mix. Personal ambition probably played a part. Perceived political snubs certainly did. But mostly it seems a growing conviction that Muslim interests just couldn't be protected in a future India dominated by a Hindu majority. And if you zoom out, the seeds for this kind of communal politics, this distinct Muslim political identity, they were sown even earlier. Think about Lord Curzon partitioning Bengal back in 1905, ostensibly for administration, but it immediately inflamed communal feelings by creating Muslim-majority East Bengal and Hindu-majority West Bengal. And then you had that Muslim delegation going to Viceroy Minto in 1906, successfully asking for those separate electorates we talked about. That officially marked out distinct Muslim interests to the British. So these things were happening before Jinnah's big shift, kind of setting the stage.
Right, so those early British policies, maybe intentionally or maybe not, they created fault lines that could be exploited later. And Jinnah eventually did resign from Congress. What were the key things that pushed him away from the party he'd once really championed?
Well, a really big factor was the rise of Mahatma Gandhi, and His whole style of politics, mass movements, nonviolent civil disobedience, especially after World War I, events like the Rowlatt Acts, those really harsh laws letting the British jail people without trial, and then the horrific Jallianwala Bagh massacre in Amritsar in 1919, where British troops just fired into a peaceful crowd. Those events really radicalized the independence movement. Gandhi's approach brought millions into politics, making Congress a mass organization. But Jinnah, he was a lawyer, a deep believer in constitutional methods, working through legal channels, parliament. Gandhi's methods, which he saw as, well, emotional, maybe even unconstitutional, he just couldn't get on board with them. And there was perhaps an element of, not wanting to play second fiddle to Gandhi. He felt his own style, his role as a negotiator, was getting sidelined by this new populism.
That's a really interesting clash of styles, isn't it? The constitutionalist versus the mass mobilizer. Okay, another major flashpoint seems to be the Nehru Report in 1928. What was that about, and why did Jinnah and the Muslim League react so negatively?
Right, the Nehru Report. It was a major effort led by Motilal Nehru, Jawaharlal's father, for Congress to basically draft a constitution for a future independent India. It proposed a strong, secular, federal India, universal voting rights, fundamental rights for everyone. Sounds good, right? But, and this was the absolute deal breaker for the League, it rejected separate electorates for minorities. The idea was to build this single, integrated Indian nation, get rid of religion as a basis for political rights. For Jinnah and the League, this felt like tearing up the Lucknow Pact, the very foundation of their political cooperation with Congress.
So it basically wiped out those guarantees Muslims had gotten back in 1916.
Yeah.
What was Jinnah's response then? How did he try to protect Muslim rights after that report? This is where his famous 14 points come in, yeah.
Exactly. In direct response to the Nehru Report, Jinnah laid out his 14 points in 1929. These were basically a comprehensive list of demands to safeguard Muslim interests in any future setup. Things like guaranteeing one-third Muslim representation in the central government, making sure Muslim majorities in provinces like Bengal and Punjab weren't diluted, and having protections for minorities in all provinces. He even said, look, give us these points and we might give up separate electorates. It was an offer. But Congress largely dismissed them, didn't really engage, and that dismissal really killed off the spirit of the Lucknow Pact. For Jinnah, it seemed like proof that Congress wasn't serious about protecting Muslim interests in the kind of united India they envisioned.
Yeah, it really sounds like the relationship was just fundamentally breaking down, moving past disagreements into totally different paths. How did the actual idea of a separate Muslim nation, Pakistan, start to get real traction in this atmosphere of growing distrust?
Well, this is where the ideology really takes a sharp turn. The whole concept of Muslims being a distinct nation, not just a minority community within India, started to gain ground. This was a contrast to the usual idea of nationalism based purely on territory. Everyone living in India is Indian. Thinkers like Allama Iqbal, the famous poet-philosopher, were crucial here. He was, as one source puts it, rabidly opposed to territorial nationalism. For Iqbal, Islam itself was the basis of Muslim identity and nationhood, separate from Hindus. He didn't believe a shared homeland could work if it meant losing that distinct Muslim identity. Then you had others like Chaudhry Rahmat Ali, a student over in Cambridge, who actually coined the name Pakistan. He went even further, proposing specific Muslim states, even suggesting a population exchange and seeing Urdu as the pure language of this pure nation. So this two-nation theory, the idea that Hindus and Muslims were fundamentally two distinct nations, it was starting to solidify, not just politically, but philosophically too.
That's a really important distinction. It wasn't just about political safeguards anymore. It was the deeper idea that these two nations just couldn't live together peacefully in one state. So by 1940, Jinnah is demanding Pakistan unequivocally. Tell us about the Lahore Resolution. What did it actually call for?
Right. The Lahore Resolution of March 1940, often called the Pakistan Resolution. This was the big formal declaration. It called for the areas where Muslims were the majority, specifically in the northwestern and eastern zones of India, to be grouped together to form independent states where the units would be autonomous and sovereign. Notice the plural states. Initially, it wasn't necessarily clear if it meant one single country or potentially two separate ones, one in the west, one in the east, like Bengal and Assam. But the message was clear. Jinnah declared it was our goal today, not a counter for bargaining. This was it. The demand for separation was now official policy for the Muslim League.
And his rhetoric around this time became incredibly powerful, really hammering home that two-nation theory. You mentioned the quotes earlier depicting Hindus and Muslims as having totally different philosophies, customs, literature, different heroes, different histories, painting this picture of just fundamental incompatibility.
Absolutely. He argued forcefully that to yoke together two such nations under a single state must lead to growing discontent and final destruction. It was stark. And he was clever. He didn't just appeal to religion, he also tapped into economic anxieties, promising Muslims opportunities they felt they were denied in a Hindu-dominated system. But here's where it gets really interesting and kind of complicated, especially looking back at the sources on the 1945-46 election campaign, which was crucial. Publicly, Jinnah often maintained this sort of vague, modernist, almost secular image. But behind the scenes, he allowed, even encouraged, powerful religious figures, the ulema, the scholars, and the peers, the spiritual leaders, to really whip up religious fervor. They were invoking the idea of a pristine 7th century Islamic state, the time of the Prophet. And there's evidence he made secret deals with powerful clerics, promising them that Islamic law, the Sharia, would be the supreme law of Pakistan. So this strategic ambiguity, appealing to different groups with different messages, it was incredibly effective in mobilizing support.
That's a critical point, that gap between the public persona and the private, or perhaps more targeted promises. But we should also remember, it wasn't like every single Muslim in India was on board with this. Who were the Muslims against Pakistan? What were their reasons?
Yeah, that's absolutely crucial and often gets missed. It shows just how diverse Muslim political opinion really was. Many significant Muslim groups, including some very prominent theologians, regional political parties, social organizations, they actively opposed the Pakistan demand. You had figures like Syed Abu Ala Maududi, a major Islamic thinker, founder of Jamaat Islami. He opposed Congress's secularism, sure, but he also initially criticized Jinnah's Pakistan. He saw it as just another national state, not a truly Islamic state, according to his vision. He even called it Napakistan, impure land, which is quite something. Then you had other groups, like the Momin Party, representing Muslim artisan communities, or the Orar Party, who were religiously conservative but supported Congress. They challenged Jinnah's claim to speak for all Muslims. The reasons varied. Some feared for the Muslims who would be left behind in India. Others genuinely believed in a united, multi-faith India. And some just had different ideas about Islam and politics. So it reminds us that Muslim identity wasn't monolithic, and the Pakistan idea faced real internal opposition.
That's a really important layer to add. So with this demand getting stronger, but also facing internal dissent, how did the British handle this escalating situation? They were still in charge after all.
Well, the British were definitely caught in the middle, weren't they? They were facing intense pressure from Congress for a united, independent India and equally intense pressure from the League for partition. They tried to find compromises. They sent missions out. You had the Cripps mission in 42, then the Cabinet Mission Plan in 46. These plans tried different formulas, offering dominion status, proposing a very loose federation where provinces would be grouped, trying to give Muslim areas autonomy while keeping India technically united. But ultimately, none of it worked. The gap between the League's absolute demand for sovereign Pakistan and Congress's insistence on unity, even a loose unity, was just too wide by then. Neither side trusted the other enough to make the necessary concessions. It really felt like compromise was becoming impossible, making partition seem almost, well, inevitable.
And as those negotiations kept failing, the situation on the ground got incredibly tense, leading to widespread violence. What was the role of Direct Action Day in that awful escalation?
Direct Action Day, August 16th, 1946. That was called by the Muslim League after they rejected the Cabinet Mission Plan. It was a hugely significant and ultimately tragic move. Jinnah famously said the League was now bidding goodbye to constitutional methods and spoke of holding a pistol in his hand. Quote, "It was meant to be a day of protest, to show Muslim strength and determination for Pakistan. But tragically, in Calcutta particularly, it just exploded into horrific communal violence. Thousands were killed in just a few days. And that violence then spread to Bihar, later to Punjab. It created this terrible cycle of fear, mistrust, revenge killings. It really poisoned the atmosphere and probably hardened the resolve on both sides that partition, however painful, might be the only way to stop the bloodshed."
A truly horrific period. So by June 1947, partition is basically decided. The final plan involved dividing Punjab and Bengal, the two biggest provinces with mixed populations but overall Muslim majorities. How did Jinnah react to that? He'd wanted those entire provinces for Pakistan.
Yeah, that was a really bitter blow for him. Initially, he was furious. He called the partition of Bengal and Punjab a sinister move, blaming the spite and bitterness of the Congress. His argument was, look, if you're partitioning India based on religion to create Pakistan, then provinces with Muslim majorities should come to Pakistan in full. But Lord Mountbatten, the viceroy overseeing the transfer of power, had a pretty logical counterargument. He basically said, if the principle is division based on religious demographics, then that same principle applies within Bengal and Punjab too. You can't have it both ways. Jinnah eventually, very reluctantly, had to accept it. He realized it was the price for getting any Pakistan at all, even if it was, in his famous words, a moth-eaten or truncated version. It was a moment of harsh political reality.
And so, Pakistan is born August 14th, 1947. Jinnah becomes its first governor general. Now, this is where things get really debated. What was his vision for this new country? Especially considering that famous speech he gave on August 11th, just before independence.
Right. This is absolutely central to understanding Pakistan's ongoing identity struggles. It's what some call Jinnah's foundational paradox. That speech on August 11th, 1947, to Pakistan's first Constituent Assembly is remarkable. He said things like, "You are free. You are free to go to your temples. You are free to go to your mosques. You may belong to any religion or caste or creed. That has nothing to do with the business of the state." And famously, he expressed this hope that Hindus would cease to be Hindus and Muslims would cease to be Muslims, not in the religious sense, but in the political sense as citizens of the state, unquote. For many, especially secularists in Pakistan, this speech is a cornerstone. It's seen as Jinnah laying out a vision for a modern secular state where religion is personal and citizenship is equal for all.
But hang on, how does that square with the deeply religious rhetoric used to mobilize people for Pakistan? The appeals to Islam, the promises to the clerics about Sharia law. Was it a total U-turn or something else?
Exactly. It's way more complicated than a simple U-turn. That August 11th speech definitely champions secular citizenship, but it stands in pretty stark contrast to those pre-partition tactics, the appeals to the ulema and peers, the assurances about Sharia we discussed. And even after partition, as Governor General, Jinnah didn't stop using Islamic language in public. He often described Pakistan as a Muslim state based on Islamic ideals, the bulwark of Islam. He apparently was interested in finding an Islamic alternative to both capitalism and communism. He even advised Muslims still in India to maintain their separate identity. So the key point really is that this mix of messages, secular here, Islamic there, which had been so useful politically before 1947, it created this deep ideational confusion, as one source calls it. And that confusion became embedded in the very foundation of Pakistan, leading to this ongoing internal tug-of-war over what the country was actually supposed to be. So that ambiguity, maybe even strategic ambiguity, that helped create Pakistan, it then became this huge challenge for the new nation itself.
Precisely. What worked as rhetoric before independence became a fundamental identity crisis afterwards. It dictated so much of Pakistan's future path. After Jinnah died relatively soon after independence, in 1948, the Objectives Resolution was passed in 49. And that resolution explicitly stated that sovereignty over the universe belongs to Allah. That really set the constitutional direction. Now, leaders like Liaquat Ali Khan tried to balance it, reassure minorities, but the overall trend was set. Later constitutional developments declaring Pakistan an Islamic Republic in 1956, introducing things like the blasphemy laws, bringing back separate electorates for non-Muslims for a time. They all show how the system, the structure of opportunity, as one scholar puts it, favored those pushing for more explicitly doctrinal Islamic state. So that core struggle, secular vision versus Islamic state, it wasn't an accident. It was baked in from the start, a direct legacy of Jinnah's own complex and sometimes contradictory messaging. Wow. What an absolutely incredible and, deeply complex story. This deep dive really highlights how one leader's journey, with all its shifts and turns, can unleash forces, powerful, sometimes contradictory forces that shape entire regions for generations. That duality in his vision is just really striking.
It truly is. Jinnah's relentless drive for a Muslim homeland, his skill in appealing to so many different hopes and fears, economic, religious, political, it worked to create Pakistan. But it also, perhaps unintentionally, opened this Pandora's box, as the source material suggests, of ideational confusion and contestation over his political legacy. The two-nation theory itself, the very foundation, set off this enduring struggle over national identity, not just between India and Pakistan, but crucially within Pakistan itself, a struggle that continues today.
It really makes you think, doesn't it? When nations are born, how much is down to the clear plans of the founders, and how much is shaped by the unpredictable power of the ideas they set loose? For you, looking back at all this, what stands out as the most surprising or maybe the most impactful piece of this whole story?